For this lesson, we're going to be looking at piecewise functions and the domain and the range for each of these. It's important to remember that our transformation laws still apply. But for this lesson, we're going to be using our calculator to help us out. So let's look at this first equation. So we have that -1 plus x when x is less than 3. So let's think about when x is less than 3. Here is the line of x is equal to 3. So if x is less than 3, we need all of the x's that are less than that. So we're going in this direction. So really, we're on this side of that line for x is less than 3. And so let's plug in and let's think about what those numbers are. So we could think of this as the square root of x minus 1. So that would be like the graph of the square root of x shifted down 1 unit. And in order to help us with this, let's plug in some numbers and see what we can get. So the first thing that we can plug in is, let's plug in 3. So we have the square root of 3 minus 1. And that gives us a 0.732. So on our graph at x equals 3, we're going to be at 0.732. So somewhere in there. Okay, let's look at the square root of 2. So let's look at when x is equal to 2. So we're going to say the square root of 2 minus 1. And that's at 0.41. So a little bit less than a half. Okay, let's go to when x is 1. So we have the square root of 1 minus 1, which is 0. So when x is 1, all right, when x is 1, we get 0 for our y coordinate. And let's try when it's 0. So the square root of 0 minus 1. And that's -1. So here is our square root graph. Remember that we can't have negatives in the domain for the square root. So if we were to try the square root of -1 minus 1, we are going to get an error. And we have an error that tells us that there's a domain issue or a non-real answer. All right. So this right here will tell us that's the piece of -1 plus the square root of x when x is less than 3. So we have successfully graphed this. All right. This is on the left-hand side of 3. Notice that we need an open circle here at 3 because x is not equal to 3. It is strictly less than 3. Now let's move on to the other piece. So the other piece is when x is greater than or equal to 3. And so that's going to be on this side of 3. And we're dealing with all of these x's in this direction. So what will that look like for us here? Well, let's do this in purple. And so we have 3 when we plug in 3, -3 plus 2. Well, that gives us -1. So at x equals 3, we have -1 as our answer. Let's plug in x equals 4. So we have -4 plus 2, which is -2. We have the next one is -5 plus 2 is -3. And this makes sense because this is a down 1 over 1 graph because our slope is -1. And so here we have it. So we have our piecewise graph. The piece in blue is going to represent the square root of x minus 1, and the piece in purple is going to represent negative x plus 2. Let's look at number 2. So again, we have the square root of x plus 2, so looking for a shift to the left when x is less than or equal to 3. All right, and we're going to do this in purple as well. So again, we are looking at 3. 3 is the x coordinate that we are looking at here. And so let's plug in 3. So we have the square root of 3 plus 2. That's going to give us 2.236. So I'm going to estimate here somewhere like that. Okay, let's plug in 1 because we know we are less than 3. So we should be on this side of 3. So let's plug in 2. So we have the square root of 2 plus 2. And that gives us 2. Okay, let's try 1, the square root of 1 plus 2. It's 1.7. Just a little bit, all right, lower than that. Okay, we have the square root of 0. 0 plus 2. So 1.4. That's at 1. Let's see. Okay. And let's try negative 2 because negative 2 plus 2 is going to give me 0. So that's a nice easy point for us. All right, so at negative 2 we get 0. The last point, I didn't try negative 1. So I have the square root of negative 1 plus 2, which is 1. So our square root graph kind of looks like this. All right, it is a closed circle because x is less than or equal to 3. And now let's look at our other piece of this equation. All right, let's look at 1. So g of x is equal to 1 when x is greater than 3. So for this to be true, all right, then our y coordinate is always going to equal 1. That is our y coordinate that's equal to 1. And this can only be true when x is greater than 3. So at 1, we'll have an open circle and then a straight line. So at x equals 4, we get 1. X equals 5, it's 1. At x equals 6, it's 1. 7 and 8. And forever, to infinity, will be 1. So here is our piecewise graph that represents these two functions. Okay, let's look at number 3. H of x is the absolute value of x minus 2 when x is less than or equal to 1. So let's do this in green here. So we are going to plot points that are on the left-hand side of 1. All right, so let's try that out here. So we have, let's see, let's plug in 1. So we have the absolute value. And you can go in on your calculator and find the absolute value. So when you hit the math button, all right, I'll go back. Hit this math button here, go to number, and click absolute value. And you'll see those absolute value bars will pop up. So we're going to plug in 1 minus 2, and that gives us 1 there. And it is less than or equal to 1, so it's going to be a closed circle here. Well, what about if I try 0? So 0 minus 2. Well, that's 2. Okay, negative 1 minus 2. Let's see what that is. So again, math, absolute value. Negative 1 minus 2. Absolute value of that is 3. So it appears that we have this type of graph going in that direction. All right, now let's look at, in blue here, we're going to look at the square root of x plus 3 when x is greater than 1. So again, 1 is our dividing line, but this time we're going to be looking on this side of 1. So we have 3. So let's do the square root of 1 plus 3. All right, and so at x equals 1, our y value that we get is 4. Okay, and I should not have made this a closed circle because x is just greater than. So this should be an open circle at 4. All right, let's look at 2. So we're going to take the square root of 2 plus 3. That gives us 4.4, somewhere in there. All right, let's try 3. So we're going to take the square root of 3 plus 3. That's 4.7, so a little bit higher. Let's move up to x equals 4. So the square root of 4 plus 3, and that gives us 5. Okay, so these are enough points to get the idea of our square root graph. So this is the piecewise for that. So you have a piece that is less than or equal to 1, and you have a piece that is greater than 1. And notice that one side of the graph is most likely going to have the closed circle, and the other side of the graph has got to have the open circle.